And you're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's the one, the only, the majestic ape, Senor Silverback, coming to you on another edition of Rogue Money Radio. I am broadcasting live in an undisclosed location deep within the underground caves in Central Park in the middle of Manhattan. Making sure that this broadcast comes out swimmingly and with no issues or problems on full work on the flux capacitors as well as the lithium crystals is none other than the uncanny producer, CJ. And we have with us the man, the myth. He is the one who is the voice of clarity in this age of confusion, Charles Hugh Smith, aka CH Smith, aka of Two Minds Blog. The one, he is one. I'm telling you, this guy, I love Charles's work. Such an awesome thinker. Uh, I mean, out of everybody we have on, CJ, it's like out of everybody, like Charles and us are like boom, right down the middle, bro.
Yeah, he is. And usually when he's on, I take down notes. I grab my
Get your
piece of paper
notebook
and
out.
I got my notebook out. I'm ready.
If
I'm
you have
ready.
your
I'm
notebook
excited.
out, get ready. If you have your moleskin out, get it ready. Here we go. Charles, what's up, buddy? How are you? Glad to have you back.
Hey, good. I don't know if I can live up to these expectations, but I take a lot of notes when I'm discussing stuff with you guys too. So it's that's what's great about these discussions is everybody learns. Even if you disagree, you're going to learn something by listening to when we start talking about blockchain, gold-backed currencies, all good stuff. And even if you vehemently disagree, you're still going to learn something.
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of this whole entire thing. Charles, let's get into this, man. We have a whole granola bowl of stuff that we could discuss. So wherever you want to go, man, let's get at it. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's talk about the idea to start with. I wrote a piece a couple days ago on why gold-backed currencies won't work in the current system we have,
Right.
and I know that's emotionally a kind of a live issue with a lot of people because a lot of people have emotionally committed to gold as the solution to all of our problems, and if we just used gold as money and had gold-backed money, then a lot of our speculative craziness would go away, and we'd have a more rational, balanced, more stable economic system. And we all understand that's intuitively compelling, right? Because it's like, well, hey, the world did okay for like 5,000 years with gold and silver, and so if we just went back to that, we could scrape off all the financialization that's corrupted our economy. But what the point of my article was, you're going to have to choose between growth and Keynesianism and a fractional reserve banking system that creates money out of thin air like we have now. That's in one side. If you want to ditch all that and not have any access to those tools, then fine, gold-backed currency will work. But it's not going to work when you have fractional reserve currency. And we can, maybe one of you want to tackle explaining that. A basic idea here, as far as I understand it, is if somebody puts $10 in a bank, deposits cash, right, in a fractional reserve system, the bank can go and loan $90.
Yeah.
Actually $180 that it created out of thin air, and basically loaned that money into existence. And so you've got huge leverage, and typically it's around 20 to 1 or 30 to 1. And so there's huge leverage, and so a minor loss in the system blows the whole thing up. Where in a gold-backed system, the only money that a bank could loan would be somebody deposits $10 in cash. They could loan 9 of it and keep $1 for loss reserves. So you can see that there's about, I think this is from memory, but I think we have about 7 trillion in cash in the U.S. economy, roughly speaking, in 401ks and checking accounts and all that stuff. Well, we have about 90 trillion in so-called assets, most of it debt.
Yeah.
Right. So you'd have to basically reduce the amount of credit and debt in the system by 90%. And that I don't see any way around that. What does that sound like a reasonable explanation, or did I miss something?
No. It's perfectly well said, because the whole system, in order to have a classical gold-backed system, the type that we talk about, the the real gold system that ran from 1870 to 1912, the classical gold-backed system, you cannot have fractional reserve lending. So this whole fractional reserve lending, this whole central banking concept, as it exists today, has to be overhauled. It has to be done away with. Otherwise, it's pointless. I mean, it won't even work. You try to implement, some sort of gold reserve or gold-backed currency right now, with the type of setup you have right now, you're going back not to the gold standard of not the classical gold standard of 1870 to 1912, but you're going back to this chimera, this Gila monster that was created after World War I in 1924, when Churchill was really pushing the Bank of England to go with this partial reserve gold-backed system that was an absolute not only was it a financial chimera, but it was disastrous in its implementation. And it was so bad that's the one that John Keynes said is a barbarous relic. He wasn't referring to the 1870 gold standard, but the 1924 bastardized version of a gold standard that was so horrible. So yeah, we have to get out of this whole entire fiat system. It doesn't work. It never has.
Right. And so I kind of filling out this whole idea is again, it's in theory it sounds like it's clean and commonsensical, right? But then when we start looking at these sort of complicating factors like currency flows and trade, exports and imports and trade imbalances, then the picture gets a little murkier, because here's what happens, and this is what happened to the U.S. in the late 1960s, right? When President Nixon took the U.S. completely off the gold standard, even this bastardized version, right? And maybe to back up one step, what do we mean when we say bastardized or classical? In a classical gold-backed currency, the currency is convertible to gold. Correct. Meaning you can go to the bank and say, I'm going to turn in this paper bit of currency and I want gold for it. And this was, the US didn't ban that kind of convertibility for its citizenry, way back when, right? Yeah. When it took all the precious metal content out of its coinage and so on. But it was still convertible in trade flows. And so the US started running deficits, and countries like France were wise to the whole thing, and they said, well, that's nice, but we want gold. You can keep your dollars. We want to convert the trade imbalance. You guys owe us money. You're running a trade deficit. We want the balance paid in gold. And so what was happening was all the US gold was draining away. So if you're running trade deficits, all your gold's going to be gone. You're going to have nothing to back up your currency. So that means that you have to run a very tight, balance in your trade. You can run very tiny deficits for occasionally, and then some surpluses, but it really has to be in balance. And so then that the problem with that is, if you're running a reserve currency in the current fiat currency system, that means everybody else in the world is using your money, at least occasionally, right, for trade or as reserves. And that's what the US dollar is, right? It's a reserve currency. People hold on to billions of dollars of it kind of as a substitute for gold, and not that it's a straight substitute, but as part of their reserves. The ideal reserves are, you've got gold, and then you've also got some dollars or euros or yuan or yen, something that that you can use to balance your own trade books. It's like it's kind of like useful to have currency. And so if you're running deficits, you can't have a gold-backed currency, right? Because all your gold's gonna be gone. But you can't have a reserve currency if you don't run deficits, because that's how you transfer enough of your currency into other people's hands so that they can use it. And so, if to explain it another way, if you took like a very small country's currency, like say the Swiss franc, right? It's considered very stable and desirable. Yeah. Well, there's just not enough of it. I mean, global trade in currencies is a couple trillion a day, and global trade itself is running into the trillions. And so you need a lot of currency to work as a reserve currency. And the only way to do that is to export your currency, which is another way of saying run huge deficits. And so it's a funny thing when people tell me, well, China can have a reserve currency. And I'm going, no, they can't, because they run trade surpluses. They're trading, their goods and services, and they're getting a surplus of other people's currency. They're not exporting the yuan out there. They're actually getting a bunch of other people's currency, mostly dollars, that then they have to basically convert into yuan. And so again, it all sounds pretty tricky, and it can be tricky, but the bottom line is, if you're going to run a reserve currency that other people are, you're going to provide trillions and trillions and trillions of units of your currency so other people can use it. Well, guess what? Then you're running deficits. So that's why when people say, well, China's going to, have a reserve currency based on gold, it's all like, well, I don't think so, because, there's not enough yuan out there to grease all the global trade. And the other problem is China has a huge fractional reserve system. I mean, they created $30 trillion in new, yuan credit over the last decade. So I have to say, well, it's impossible. I don't care what country tries it. It's a bastardized version, or it's an illusion, if you're running a fractional reserve system. Anyway, sorry for that long-winded thing about reserve currencies, but don't expect China to have a gold-backed currency for those two reasons. They got a fractional reserve system, and they'll never have a reserve currency because they're importing currency, not exporting it.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't want a reserve currency. Nobody wants a reserve currency status. Not the Chinese. They don't want to make the same mistake that the Brits and the Americans have made. But also, it's pretty interesting also that, China has pretty much two banking systems. I would go far as to say that there's a third banking system in operation in China. You have, of course, the traditional banking system, which is very much modeled after us in the West. But you also have the shadow banking system, which was pretty much like the Wild Wild West, where you could have a pawn shop that could become a bank and lend to various building and/or construction projects and whatnot. And the third system, of course, is how much gold they're stockpiling is astronomical. In fact, gold being the focal point of what's going on with their New Silk Road, One Belt, One Road initiative, is also quite alarming. And they know what's coming, Charles. They know that crash is coming, and the way to inoculate themselves from this bubble that's about to burst is to be in hard assets, and they love Bitcoin, man. That's another thing.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because again, there's been a lot of chatter, and when I'm post something that's positive about Bitcoin, I often get feedback like, "Well, once the Chinese ban it, it's going to drop to $100, right?" And again, that understanding is it's limited, but it's commonsensical. In other words, like, why would the Chinese let something that goes around their own controls and currencies? Why would they let it exist? And I think I can think of some reasons myself. Number one is they can't really control it in a peer-to-peer network. And so I would add a fourth banking system to the one the three you described, which is kind of like the shadow banking is peer-to-peer, but the peer-to-peer blockchain is almost another kind of banking. And that was one thing I wanted to ask you about, is we can talk about at some point, is if that system is robust, a peer-to-peer decentralized blockchain financial system, then why do we need conventional banks?
Yeah, we don't. We really don't. Banks, there's some guys in who are like real top end forecasters, especially within Silicon Valley and technologies, and they're really high up there in trends forecasting. A lot of these guys are saying that the next big disruption, kind of like how Uber disrupted taxis, okay, where taxi medallions, which I remember a time where, if you wanted to buy a taxi medallion in New York City, you'd have to be spending $200,000 just to get a taxi medallion to drive a taxi cab. Now the price on those have come down so drastically because of disruptors like Uber. There's disruptions happening everywhere. Airbnb is destroying the hotel industry. Bitcoin's the next thing. Cryptocurrencies are going to absolutely eradicate banking. Who the heck wants to deal with a bank? The fee, it is, and like you said, before we went live, Charles, it's a parasitic relationship. You're literally putting money into a bank to watch it disappear slowly, with 100% third-party counter risk. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more worse scenario.
That's a great point, because you see it so many times with articles talking about these banks and how they have way too many brick and mortar banks, and the goal is that they're becoming obsolete. There's no need anymore to have a banking center anymore. It's outdated, and you see so much consolidation and closings going on now that they will become obsolete.
Yes.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that a little bit more and go into it, because the average person might go, well, wait a minute, you've got to have a place where I can put my money, and then I got to have a place I can go get an auto loan or truck loan, and who can I trust? And so I think if we go back to the beginning of the banking system, the bank served an economic purpose, which was it was a trusted intermediary between people trading stuff, or buyers and sellers, or creditors and debtors, right? And so that's how it could charge a premium for holding money and keeping accounts, right? It was like the trusted third party. And so now we look at it, and as you say, if you count all the derivatives and risk exposure that banks have taken on in order to reap these enormous profits, they're actually quite risky. They're not safe, right? And the trust level is basically backed by the government. In other words, you can trust that your money will be returned to you, not because the bank has the money waiting in a vault for you. No, it's because the government will print it and hand it to you when the bank fails. So that's not really a trust. They're not really saying the bank is a trustworthy thing. And so if it's not a trustworthy intermediary, then it has no value at all. So let's say that you can go and pay anybody in the world, and you don't need a bank. You can use PayPal, or you can use Bitcoin, and the transaction cost is super low on Bitcoin, right? Yep. And if you want to borrow money, we're starting to see the beginnings of peer-to-peer lending, right? And right now it's in the beginning stages, right? People fund people through Patreon, or they fund a documentary. Yeah.
Indiegogo. I mean, they're crowdfunding. I mean, there are companies that have launched cell phones and done very well because of crowdfunding. Like, who the heck wants to go to the bank? Let me see your business plan. Okay. All right. Okay. What do you think your 5-year projections are going to be? Okay. All right. All right. We'll give you a loan for $10,000 at 17% interest. I mean, but I need 50. Well, you're only getting 10, and if we like it, maybe we could renegotiate and maybe get you another loan. Remember those days? You had to walk in there with your business plan, this, that, and the other. Let me get the heck out of here. You have an innovative idea or a product, you put it up online, and people will give you money. Brilliant.
Yeah, and the thing is it can be it's an opt-in system. So let's say we could extend this to go, well, why do we even need auto loans? Somebody goes up there and says, I want to buy a new car or truck, and I need X amount of dollars. I need 20 grand, and I'm willing to pay 8%. And maybe there's not enough people willing based on what information they have. Maybe he has to go up to 11% or whatever. It's all opt-in. If you can find people to give you the money at a lower interest rate because they believe in you, or they have evidence that you're a trustworthy borrower or whatever, then but there's no central authority deciding what your interest rate's going to be. It's like whatever people are willing to give you. And if they're not willing to give you low interest rates, well, then you can get the money, but you're going to be paying a higher rate of interest because they've decided they need a higher return for the risk of loaning you the money. And so it's a beautiful system because it's basically a democracy. But there's no central, you don't win or lose, right? Everybody, they think is good for them. And, and some of these projects like with Indiegogo, the people, they got the money, but they failed to finish their documentary or whatever. And, that's the way it is. There's failure, right? And then that's part of the system, right? Is you have to be transparent about the risk you're taking. Where like our banking system is, we're told constantly how safe it is. And then 2008 comes along and the whole thing is about to blow up, and we're being told the ATMs aren't going to work. And, it's all like, well, wait a minute, is that safe? And so I think what most people don't understand is to say the next crisis, maybe it's next year, later this year, maybe they can put it off, kick the can down to 2021 or something. The banks are going to blow up again, and they're going to need another 800 trillion or whatever the number is for bailouts. And then, maybe people will just say, why don't we just not bail these guys out?
Yeah.
Let's just let them blow up because we don't need them anymore.
Right.
And of course, the system is going to defend the necessity of banks because banks they're the parasites that skim off hundreds of billions of dollars and hand it to politicians and foundations and the whole establishment that basically is a parasite on the parasitic banking sector. Parasites on parasites.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny to me that look at JP Morgan. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars. They hired Blythe Masters. I mean, the name alone, Blythe Masters. It's like a comic book villain, Charles. It's like if you wanted a comic book villain, Blythe Masters would be the name. Blythe, right? She is the witch of derivatives. She is the sorceress of hijinks and shenanigans in the financial markets. You hire her, then the grand wizard himself, Larry Summers, they get together to create a JP Morgan type blockchain cryptocurrency equivalent of Bitcoin, and it crashed and burned before it even got off the runway because they're like, oh, we're going to create this blockchain. It's going to work great. Well, can we see your blockchain? No, it's private. Well, how do you see? That's the whole thing. Their mindset is so old and so stuck in the past that they don't understand this frequency shift where humanity is like, wait a minute, we don't want to live under these hierarchical structures anymore. We want to be able to live in a plane where you could have $20 million and I could have $20, but when it comes time for transacting, we're both treated the same.
Yes, exactly. And that's a point that to me carries over through our whole system, not just in the economy, but the culture and our society. In other words, when you have hierarchical systems, then the people at the top, they'll scoop all the privileges for themselves, right, and leave none for the bottom. Why bother, right? I mean, that's what a hierarchy is, So we look around at the inequality, the rising inequality, the rising insecurity of the bottom 80%, and the way our power structure works, and you go, well, hierarchy creates privilege. The only way we're ever going to have a system that doesn't have privilege, the kind that you're talking about, where everyone's treated equally, is to get rid of hierarchies. And that was the point of my book, my recent little book on privilege. Was the only way to get rid of privilege is you can't fool around with the edges, like demand that the Ivy League, colleges admit a certain number of people, and you can kind of play around with these games to limit privilege, but that's a charade too. That's for public relations, right? It's a travesty of a mockery of a sham of limiting privilege, right? Yeah. So you got to get rid of hierarchies, and that's the beauty of the system we're talking about with a blockchain and related decentralized, transparent, opt-in systems. Then you get rid of privilege as well. Like nobody, that's what I love about the web or the internet in general is if you want to put a photo of yourself up, well, you can, but you can just use an avatar, and you can have an invented name and an invented identity. Nobody needs to know what your ethnicity or religious beliefs or your geographic location. All that stuff nobody cares. And number one, whatever you're putting out there could be false anyway. So it's like, but it's like we're interested in other stuff. What's the quality of your ideas? Or if you're gonna pitch, you want us to give you money for a project, and describe the project. Tell us how far along you are. All of that stuff. And so I think it's a great leveling. As you say, when you go to Indiegogo, well, number one, you wouldn't go if you had $20 million already. But nobody cares whether you've got 20 grand or 20 grand or $20. It's like, yeah, the idea is what's going to motivate people. And your enthusiasm, your track record, all that stuff that people want to know about, that you should be transparent about. But we all have, the idea would be, this gives us equal access, equal opportunity, and that's a very powerful social system, not just an economic system.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why they are terrified, man. They're absolutely terrified of this whole entire change that's happening.
Yeah, right. And somebody just posted, a reader posted a comment on my Facebook comment chain that they said, well, the status quo works for most people, and it's not going to go down. And when it does, then some other system will arise. And it was all like, I said, yeah, that's the whole point. Is we have to design an alternative so that it's available. So when this, when the status quo crumbles or implodes, that people go, well, now what do I do? And it's all like, well, here, just start using this stuff. And say, oh, okay. And if it's easy, then people will use it. If it's difficult and complicated, they won't. And so, obviously the blockchain to me is getting easier to use all the time, as just a dummy, a guy that doesn't want to go to a lot of trouble. How do I use Bitcoin? And it's all like, hey, this is pretty easy. You just, the person you want to give the money to or pay for, then they give you the address, you put it in, and then, how much you're going to pay, you click okay, and then, hey, done, and it's like 25 cents or something, Yeah. Exactly. Whereas if you try to pay somebody through the banking system, it's all like, well, you're already a criminal, right? Because you probably broke some law somewhere in and then it's like, they want like, I don't know, 35, 45 bucks, fee every time you pay somebody, so.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Bitcoin, record new high, 1206 per coin.
Woo! There we go.
Yeah. And so we talked a little bit about Bitcoin and China, and I thought I learned a lot from what you guys were able to tell me, was that China was not trying to ban Bitcoin. It was trying to...
They were going after the exchanges.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the exchanges were doing the fractional reserve equivalent of what the banks were doing. They were, they would buy like, $20,000 worth of Bitcoin, and they'd have 50,000 contracts out on $20,000 worth of Bitcoin.
Right.
And that's what the whole thing is. And they're doing the same thing that the Comex was doing. So that's what they're trying to crack down on.
Right. And so, Bloomberg had a piece out that, for the last year or so, then the Chinese authorities have been talking about creating their own blockchain currency. And I don't know what you guys think of that, or the regulatory agencies here in the States that are supposed to rule on whether we get a Bitcoin ETF or not.
Yeah.
But all this official action doesn't seem to me to be about banning Bitcoin. It's more like, let's get some skin in the game. Let's get on board here, or else we're going to be left behind. I mean, that's the kind of feeling I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the recent Prime Minister of Malta, right? The Prime Minister of Malta, he said that the rise of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, you can't stop it. So it's like, one of the things he says is that my point is, rather than resist, the European regulators should innovate and create mechanisms in which to regulate cryptocurrencies in order to harness their potential and better protect customers while making Europe the natural home of innovators. I mean, so there are some creative people out there that are trying to float different ideas, and this is Prime Minister Joseph Muscat. He's the Prime Minister of Malta, and for this guy to come out there and say that, and then you have Japan, that's all on board with Bitcoin. They're recognizing it as actual money and actual currency. Other countries are starting to recognize it as too. And you have, again, state legislators in Utah and in other states in the country are starting to, and Illinois, they're starting to recognize it as currency, as something that's real and tangible and viable.
Right. And we can say, well, why? Well, it's like everybody wants something that's cheaper and easier to use, right? The low cost, that's a winner, right? So Bitcoin transactions are cheap, and so why wouldn't you use it? And so that's part of the. If we wanted to say, is there a battle here between like gold-backed currencies and blockchain? And you could line it up like that and say, well, which of these is better? And of course, the people who value gold-backed currencies would say, well, there's the blockchain currencies. They have no intrinsic value. They're like another fiat currency. But the argument that I make and many other people do is, no, we have to look at the utility. In other words, there's a utility value. It's not just the intrinsic value, it's the utility value. And so if Bitcoin makes it really easy for people to keep control of their money and then go buy something by, scanning their mobile phone, and they pay whatever they just bought in Bitcoin, and it's all seamless, well, then why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think you could look at them as complementary, and what I look forward to is a wild, open field competition of currencies where anybody can own any number of currencies, cryptocurrencies, gold-backed, Mars, Quatlus, whatever is out there, and it's up to you, and it's up to each person. And people might well decide they want to own a variety of currencies, and so that to me is also the beauty of Bitcoin. Is right now there's at least U.S. citizens and many people around the world. They don't have to be stuck in their own national currency. Like for most of us, if I want to go and own yen, well, I can go to the bank, and a lot of banks don't even deal now in foreign currency, right? So it's a pain in the neck. You got to stand in a special line, and you can actually buy, physical bills of yen or euros or RMB, the Chinese yuan. But other than that, you're buying basically an ETF, or it's like it's hard to actually own other currencies and actually use them. You're having to go through a lot of steps to broaden your risk exposure to currencies, right? And so with Bitcoin, and it gives you a way out. You don't have to put all your eggs in one currency of the nation or block you happen to live in. So that's another utility value. And let's talk about Europe, because it's interesting that that you mentioned Malta, and that I'm not. You might be more up on which countries in Europe are against Bitcoin or banning it. I seem to recall Sweden is down on it, or
Sweden's crazy, man. Sweden is turned into an Orwellian nightmare. They literally have a Ministry of Truth, which flushes historic data down the toilet down the memory hole so nobody can figure it out. I mean, my God, could we just call it? Could we just rename Sweden Swedenstan?
Well, it's there's this kind of cool site called fiatleak.com.
Yeah.
And basically, and I can't vouch for the complete accuracy of it, but it's interesting because it sort of tracks. There's a little animation where it tracks the flow of Bitcoin out of various currencies into Bitcoin. And I don't see much action into the Eurozone. And I think that's going to change once there's a yet another fiscal financial crisis in Europe, which we all know is brewing. It's just like which bomb goes off,
Yeah.
Italy, Greece, Spain, or even France.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I think people don't. They may not understand that there's really not a lot of options for people that want to get out of their own home currency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, every country makes it difficult. As we, here in the U.S., if you want to own property or accounts in foreign banks and stuff, oh yeah, you're allowed to, but there's this inch thick of paper that you have to file every year, and to comply with all these immensely complicated regulations, and of course, if you're a criminal, if you forgot to cross a T or something like that. So and that's another issue, is the criminalization of everything that every escape route out of the current banking system, right? Then
right.
it's
If
like,
you're trying to,
yeah.
if you're trying to leave, you're a criminal, and you're up to something. You're a drug dealer. You're a terrorist financier. You're somebody who's involved in sex trafficking, and every single of these accusations that are hurled in our direction, Charles. It seems like every single year, every other month, there's a bank that's involved in a scandal that typically surrounds narcotics, human trafficking, or terrorist financing, and that is HSBC, BNP Paribas, and UBS, Credit Suisse. So there you go.
Right. And in fact, that kind of stuff we have to ask, could there be this kind of global criminal organizations without global banks? And the answer is probably not.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, look at
they're
the
money
fact that
laundering.
1000% HSBC was laundering money for the Mexican drug cartels. Unreal what was going on, and they were doing that. Then you had the it was UBS that got caught, laundering money for ISIS. Unreal. I mean, we had, over a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I had a lieutenant, this gentleman who was in military intelligence, came on board. He was in prison. He was, he befriended Brad Birkenfeld in prison. They started comparing notes. This guy had the freaking account numbers that the money was coming out of and going into, and that money that was going towards ISIS was coming back to fund U.S. Congressmen and senators' re-election campaigns. So it's crazy, man. The criminality is unbelievable, and that's what they're terrified of with blockchain, with peer-to-peer lending. And my advice to anybody who doesn't get Bitcoin, who thinks this is like the tech bubble of 2000, no, it's not. I mean, it's like saying, I was telling Charles earlier, it's like saying a 747 jumbo jet. It's like saying Air Force One and a Dragonfly are related because they have wings. There's not even remotely close. Bitcoin is the most powerful thing. Cryptocurrency is the most powerful thing, and probably the most important invention to humanity since the advent of fire, Charles. I would go far as to say that.
Well, it's certainly the advent of writing,
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me that we're at the beginning of this. In other words, we can look back in history and go, wow, wouldn't it have been interesting to be when the first steam engine just rolled along at 12 miles an hour on those tracks, and people were afraid that they might die from the speed of hitting 20 miles an hour, and and we're in this equivalent sort of industrial revolution, if you will call it that, but based on the blockchain, and that there's some bumps ahead, right? Like we all know that the transactional rate has to be increased, right? So that you can do millions of transactions at per minute or whatever, and we're not there yet, as far as I understand it.
Oh, yeah,
but
right.
There will be solutions to this, right? I mean, it's not like
they're working on it now.
Insolvable. Yeah.
They're working on it now. It's not insolvable, but the beautiful thing is, it's like when you look at, okay, here's a problem with Bitcoin. We could do X amount of transactions in X amount of times before it's recorded and it takes X amount of time for it to be recorded onto the blockchain. How do we speed it up? It's the solutions to these problems are being put out there, are being worked on by the community, by the entire, collective of free thinkers and entrepreneurs and those who are heavily invested in Bitcoin. We're the ones coming out with a solution rather than, this being done in some back room somewhere in the dark by some governmental agency. We're coming out with the solutions. It's our currency. That's what I want people to understand. Bitcoin is our currency. We are coming up with the solutions. We are the ones that are having vigorous debates about which way the blockchain should go. Should we fork Bitcoin? Should we not fork Bitcoin? And I thank God for that, Charles. And some people are like, oh my God, they're really arguing over this. That's a good thing, man, right?
Yes, that's right. And the major alternative, like the so-called altcoin universe, is expanding. And and again, I'm just an interested amateur. I don't claim to be like an expert on this at all. But I think that Ethereum, Dash, these are alternative currencies that have been designed with specifics in mind, right? To be more anonymous and to enable so-called smart contracts, in the case of Ethereum. So my point here is there are a lot of potential uses for the blockchain technology beyond merely keeping track of quote money, right, or transactions, right? And so because it enables trustworthy connections in terms of contracts and business, and so what we're really talking about here is a technology that enables decentralized, non-hierarchical trust relationships, right? And so that's a very powerful thing. And that if we look at poverty, like why are there 3 to 4 billion really poor people in the world, and including even in rural China? There's a lot of people there that are really poor. And one of the key reasons why they're poor is not because they don't want to work hard, or they don't want to get ahead, or that they don't have any skills. It's like they don't have any access to markets, right?
Right.
They're like isolated. They're in these villages with crummy roads, and so how do they improve themselves? And I'm convinced that that the blockchain technology will make it easier for people to participate in a global network. Because in other words, they don't have any money. Well, if they have a cell phone that they can buy for $20 or whatever now, then they have access to information, and then they'll have access to blockchain.
Yeah.
And they'll have some way to transact something to their own benefit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think right now they've even invented cell phone technology. Has gotten so cheap. I think there was a company out in India, and I think people should Google this. I think they made an actual Android phone. I think that costs about $1.
Wow.
That's possible, but just to put it out there, I mean, now you have, and this is what's so hard for us in the West to understand, because we take banking for granted. We're used to, all right, I'm going to open up a checking account. I'm going to get raped by fees and transaction fees and statement fees and all these other fees. We're used to that. We're used to being abused. We're used to, all right, I got my X Corp up. I'm going to go down to the local, savings and loan and present my business plan to the bank manager, and hopefully I'll get $5,000. We're used to that type of abuse. We don't realize that even though, we're used to this. There's about 6.4 billion people in this world that are unbanked or underbanked, and they're not participating in the global economy because they have no way to sell their wares and services on a global economy. And cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, changes the game. It puts the bank in their hand. And that's the most powerful thing that these guys, especially these central bankers, are terrified of.
Right. Absolutely. If you get a wallet, which is the basic sort of interface where the individual wants to transact business with a blockchain, then you get a wallet, and then you can get money into that from other people, or you can pay people with it, and that's all you need. It's and this digital. Another thing that I see a lot is people say, well, the internet itself is going to go down. It costs too much money. It uses too much electricity. It's a luxury that's going to go away.
Who said that?
I just want to.
That sounds like something like Paul Krugman would say. Remember that, Charles? In '98, Paul, I sniff cat urine. Krugman. I mean, he has that look that I don't know what it is, Charles. Look, I don't have anything against cats, but Krugman is a man. First of all, he looks weird. He has this weird look on his face, like he was in a room and he was sniffing glue for far too long. He has this perturbed look on his face. And so he just, and all the pictures I see of Krugman, he's like surrounded by cats, which I think is totally weird. Okay. So anyway, Krugman comes out in '98. I don't know, you can probably remember this. He comes out in '98 in the New York Post. I'm sorry, the New York Times. And he's like, the internet is doomed to failure because we're going to run out of connections. It is a fad that will end quickly and deliberately. It has no place outside of a public library. I mean, this is the essence of what Krugman was saying, But look at where we are now. And another thing is, just like how Bitcoin is causing the decentralization of banking and finance, the internet's getting decentralized too. That's the next big thing that's going to get disrupted, especially when you have these huge monoliths, that are out there that are trying to control information and delisting information and censoring. That's going to have a terrible backlash because creative individuals will step forth and start coming out with a solution.
That's right. And the solution will be private. It'll be transparent. I know those sound like they can't be in the same entity, but that's really what we're talking about. Peer-to-peer is, your personal information can be held private from these hierarchies of the state and central bank and all of that. But what you want to do or sell, it can be completely transparent, And so, as you say, the centralized authorities want to control everything, because if they lose control of information or their ability to obscure, all the bad things they're doing, then the wheels fall off, right? And so, I love your description of Krugman, and who I consider one of the high priests of what I call the Keynesian cargo cult. That I mean, I envision him. He's rattling some sort of like gourd with stones in it, and he's wearing a weird headdress, and he's dancing. He's going humba 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 around a fire or something. That if we only create more trillions of free money and we give it to the banks, then somehow it's going to magically trickle down, and the average person's going to be better off. And it's all like, dude, how many decades of failure do we need to log where what happens is you create the trillions, you give it to the banks, and guess what? The banks get rich, and some tiny little bit trickles down because, they're going to hire somebody to polish their new Porsche, And so somebody makes $10 polishing the Porsche. Well, that, I'm sorry, that's not trickle down. And so that's the other thing about the blockchain is where is the money created? How is it created? How is it distributed? Right. And so if you take the power to create money and to distribute it to your cronies away, then you already have a much more fairer system. Right. And, one of my crazy ideas that I'm kind of pushing is, I think there's room in the world for like a labor-backed cryptocurrency, meaning that the currency is created when people in a community go and create something, right? And they may not be profitable to Google or United Fruit or some giant global corporation, right? Like, maybe Toshiba can't make it. And so then it doesn't get done, right? There's no capital available, and there's no expertise. But there's a lot of stuff in the local economy, around the world that has value, but it's not profitable to some global corporation, so it doesn't get done. But if you create money by people doing the work, then they actually have spending money, and that creates a high velocity to the money that benefits everybody. Because, hey, if there was some village in some poor isolated area that got paid for starting to build a better road, even by hand. I mean, they're just literally shovels and the cheapest tools. They start getting a better road and they're getting money. Well, then guess what? When they complete the road, they'll actually have cash. They can go buy stuff from around the world, and somebody, whoever's selling to them, would benefit. So, cryptocurrency has the potential to greatly increase the velocity of money, because you put it in the hands of people with a lot of needs. They're going to spend that money, and it's going to flow around and benefit everybody, including global corporations who, if they want to accept cryptocurrencies, well, then, hey, they can start selling stuff like water pumps and generators and stuff like that to these people who previously were too poor to afford that stuff.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Absolutely correct. It's a game changer, and it is a death blow to the neo-feudalism that many of these globalist elitists are trying to set up,
Right. That's right. Keep them poor and make sure they don't have any access to capital or a non-banking system. Right. And just to finish that point about the internet is that, we're talking about like a cryptocurrency wallet. It's just digits. It's just digital. It uses very little information. I mean, it's not streaming some crappy TV show. That's where your bandwidth goes. And so, the cryptocurrency system we're talking about uses very little of the internet compared to video streaming and all that other kind of really high bandwidth stuff. So you can expose these millions, hundreds of millions of people you're talking about who have no access to banking. It wouldn't take much bandwidth to get them a Bitcoin wallet. Very little. Yeah. So don't tell us about how it's not possible. It's actually really cheap to do, and somebody somewhere is building it out. And someday, maybe some guy like Jack Ma will pony up $100 million and just create like a global system that's super cheap for everybody. And that would be, to me, a great business opportunity. If Jack Ma doesn't do it, somebody else should.
Oh, absolutely. It's coming, man. Hey, let me ask you a question, Charles. I mean, often a lot of people ask, what is the best way that you use to get Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, again, I am like an amateur, and I'm lazy, right?
Yeah.
And so
you're a kindred spirit, man. You really are.
Yeah. And so and then I because I'm a public figure, and I have to admit I'm quite paranoid about being a target, of rendition, not necessarily rendition.
But we don't want that. We need you alive,
buddy. Yeah, but of being hassled. Like you get and of course, how the central authorities hassle people usually is about money. So in other words, you didn't pay your tax, or and that's one of their favorite things. And so I decided I wanted to hold my Bitcoin in a U.S.-based institution that's the government has complete access to, and I report, my whatever, if I happen to trade Bitcoin and generate a profit, that it's treated like a commodity, just like I was trading silver or anything else, and I report that. So, I use a U.S.-based, California-based Bitcoin exchange.
Yeah. Do you use like Coinbase?
Yeah, I do.
That's what I'm stuck with as well. I use Coinbase. Then I have like my own bread wallet, and I run things that way. Best way to get Bitcoin, guys, go to bitcoin.com. Look up Bitcoin meetups. Go to like meetup.com. Find out, find where they do Bitcoin meetups and buy from individuals. It's the best way to do it.
Right. And
just don't meet the individual in a dark back alley somewhere. If you don't do that, you'll be fine. Yes, I have your Bitcoin. Yes, meet me in the dark alley in the back of store. Next you're knocked out and you're on a plane to Thailand. You're wondering what happened.
Right, and you're missing a kidney.
You're missing a kidney. Exactly, or worse.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is we're talking about a system that's, that you can use and you don't have to meet in a dark alley. So there's huge benefits right there too. Well, I really appreciate your guys' willingness to discuss these things these topics that are on the edge. They're like fringe to the average person, but they're becoming mainstream, and you need to figure out how to get involved because they're going to be more and more mainstream as the status quo system fails and falls apart.
Absolutely. And I always believe this, man, is when the mainstream people finally climb the mountain of reality, they're going to find us guys like you, Charles, myself, CJ, and the rest of us in the alt media sitting on the top of the mountain, roasting away a delicious spit pig, wondering, hey, what took you guys so long? That's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah,
You know?
that's right.
Head of the curve. Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds Blog. Charles, you are the man, sir. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always fun and educational. We got to do this again. We got to get this going, man. At least bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, whatever we got to do. We got to get you on.
Well, thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to talk about stuff that I think is interesting because it is the future.
It is, man. That's what it's all about. And, we talk about this now and, we can position ourselves to leverage and benefit from it.
Yes,
thank you so much,
absolutely.
buddy.
Okay.
And Charles, give out your contact info. Give out your social media and all that other stuff.
Okay. Just come to of2minds.com. Everything's there, and take a look at there's a free 35 pages of my book, A Radically Beneficial World, that talks about cryptocurrencies and what we can do with it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
With that being said, guys, you can follow us on roguemoney.net and the Rogue Money Twitter, which is at the Rogue Money. Check out the Rogue Money Facebook page. And with that being said, enjoy y'all's weekends. Take it away, CJ.
All right.